It is the 8th day of January 2026. Don't move on me, Helen, because the camera,
Okay, sorry.
camera won't move. But except the last time I did this, it shot at the ceiling, so I think I've tied it down this time.
Oh, good.
Give me your title here, so I don't
Helen
misrepresent you.
Nerska, I'm the director at the Clinton County Historical Association. Yep.
Okay, and we're not at the Clinton County Historical
No.
Association right now. We're at Meadowbrook.
And we're at Meadowbrook, and we come here every month and do a presentation, a history presentation about Clinton County, and they can choose. We have a number on the docket, and
Right.
they can choose what they want. And today we're going to do the story of Jehudi Ashmun from Champlain, and this is I feel it's a kind of a complex story because the man was we call it the extraordinary life of Jehudi Ashmun because he was just absolutely amazing. He would be diagnosed as having something today because he was really accomplished a lot in his lifetime.
Yeah.
So that's what we're talking about.
His short lifetime was what, 34 or 36 years old?
Yeah,
36?
yes,
Yeah, 36 years
When he
old.
died, yes. And he was intense the entire time. He was saved, apparently, by a minister who first came and actually claims he had the first church service in Champlain. So that's how long ago it was, right? And he apparently saved Jehudi. And Jehudi came from a family of about 10. And three others of his brothers also made a difference. So, I mean, this was an incredible founding family of Champlain that he comes from, Samuel Ashmun, yeah.
Yes, and what is also interesting is just looking at the timeline of his age and what Dr. William Beaumont's age. William Beaumont was the school,
Yeah,
whatever
he
they're
was
called.
a teacher there to
Yeah,
started, but
so
he
it sounds like Ashmun would have been his student
Yeah,
at that
yeah.
time. So you got two of the most famous people ever to come
I
through
know,
the
come
county
out,
in the
yes.
same classroom.
Exactly. That's a possibility, and I haven't looked into that, but that's definitely a possibility, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, so, no, Champlain's, given us these two sort of internationally known people, so,
Yeah, well,
yeah.
Beaumont wasn't born here. Yeah, Ashmun was, but
Yeah,
Beaumont was an
yeah.
import. And
Yeah.
he came over because he had some relatives that were founding Champlain, and
Yeah, yeah.
and they got his start. And
Yeah.
so if people want to learn about William Beaumont, feel free to do that. 'cause
Yes, that's right.
he's got
We
an
have a
interesting-
presentation on that, too. Yes,
Yes.
we do, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I was wondering on the way down here, I always call it Yehudi, but it's a J. So I was wondering, is Helen going to say Jehudi? Because I
No,
don't
I'm
know.
gonna say Jehudi. I was corrected when I first gave the presentation. I was corrected. So
Were you?
yes. It
Because
was
none of us
Jehudi.
ever met him, so we don't know what he
We
called
do
himself.
not know what he called himself, but we do know that his name was within the family. His brothers named their children, or their brothers' kids named their children after him.
Oh,
So
wow.
I mean, that was also a family that shared names too. So yeah, and you'll see some of the names maybe if I get to them. I tell the story of Yehudi, and then depending on the time, I can talk about his brothers because his brothers were also incredible. It was an amazing family. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they were abolitionists, and they signed the petitions, and
Mhm.
so
Well,
they
yeah,
stayed.
obviously, that's-
Those that stayed back made a difference too.
Yeah.
I think one of them, and I can't remember if it's Silas or OB, but one of them is said to have published the first. It was provided the first magazine that was published in Champlain, the Herald Freedman, and I think it had to do with abolitionists. So
Okay,
yeah.
So I'm sure you'll be explaining to people what Liberia was and how.
Oh yeah,
what
and
it's
where
all
it
about.
is. Yeah, exactly. I will.
All right, well,
Yeah.
the crowd's going to get restless here if I don't.
I know. Well, I have
don't
to
let you go.
start right on time,
You'll
Have
lose
a
your
minute.
job. Okay,
Yes.
thank you, Helen. Helen Nerska from Clinton County Historical Association.
Good, we're going to get started. I'm Helen Nerska from the Clinton County Historical Association. Some of you have seen me before, and thank you for being here. And I'm really pleased for the opportunity here to share the history of Clinton County. And we do focus only on Clinton County people, residents or something that happened in Clinton County. And this happens to be about someone who was born in Champlain. And he shaped the development of a small African nation of Liberia, among other things. But He was born, Jehudi, his name is Jehudi Ashmun, and he was Champlain born and bred. And he's memorialized, certainly in the literature and in Champlain, as the first colonization agent at Liberia in Africa. Just so we know where he's best known and he's memorialized, this is where the contribution took place, in Liberia, on the continent of Africa. So, Jehudi was the second son and the third child in a family of 10. And his father, Samuel, was a Revolutionary War veteran and one of Champlain's founding fathers. Jehudi was initially educated in Champlain, and a school had been established there in about 1795 or 1790, somewhere around that, 1796. And the first change in his life, he was a regular school student, was orchestrated by a congregational minister called Amos Pettingill. And at the time Pettingill met Jehudi, Jehudi was about 13. So, Amos Pettingill has a story of his own. And he was, as I said, a congregational minister. He studied at Harvard and was given his first post in Champlain, New York. And his first church consisted of 14 members. And the installation took place in the little island, and I believe I've been in Champlain and seen this. People from Champlain will know where it is. On the north bank of the river running beside the village. And the setting, there was a grove of trees there then, maybe not now. And he claims, Pettingill claims, it was the first religious service of its kind in the whole county. So that happened also in Champlain. But Pettingill was with the Champlain Congregational Church. So in most of the literature, Pettingill, Amos Pettingill, the preacher in Champlain, is given credit for rescuing Jehudi Ashmun, or giving him a more focused view, focusing his life, let's put it that way. That good man, and they're talking about Jehudi, was once a wayward youth, but through Pettingill's work, laboring long and taking much pains, he was at last blessed in getting Jehudi off his errors, as he had long been inclined the wrong way on the subject of religion. And Jehudi became pious and fitting for college under the instruction of Pettingill. In any event, Pettingill was successful, and Jehudi joined the Congregational Church at age 16. At age 18, in 1812, he was admitted to Middlebury College. And Middlebury College was only 4 years old at the time. It was very young, and it was a training ground, though, for the ministry, and very classical in its course of study. Pettingill, Amos Pettingill, the preacher, he was connected to Middlebury somehow through his wife. And that's where they think that might have facilitated, allowed Jehudi to get perhaps more easily accessed. So when at Middlebury, going to school, Jehudi was ill. And I'm mentioning this because this was the first of his recorded illnesses due to the intensity of his character. So I don't know what that means in those days, but you will see the things that he accomplishes takes a lot of intensity. So he came back home, taught for school in Champlain for a year, returned to Middlebury. Then, after he went to the University of Vermont, and he eventually graduated from UVM in 1816. 1816 is important. Oh, as an aside, I want to tell you there's another story. that's sitting at Middlebury College too, waiting to be told here, is that Alexander Twilight, who ended up, he was the first black graduate at Middlebury College, and he graduated there in 1823 and came to teach in Peru for about 3 years, Peru, New York. So there's another little story associated with Middlebury College. But let's go on, continue to talk about Sarah. All right, who was this guy? Well, he was described by he had a biographer, eventually, he was a very important man, Ralph Gurley, and he knew him personally. And this description is the description that you will find in just about all the literature on Jehudi Ashmun. He was tall, his hair and eyes light, features beautiful, regular and cast in the finest mold, manners were dignified yet mild, and in his countenance an expression of the most benevolent affection, softened the lineaments of a lofty, I thought this was interesting, a lofty, firm, and fearless mind. So what happened when he graduated from Middlebury? He went on, and his first job in the fall of 1816, so he graduated in the spring, in the fall of 1816, he was the first principal of what is now known as the Bangor Theological Seminary. Now,
Dr. J,
that
can you
happened
please
to
call the
have,
fourth floor? Dr. J, please call the fourth floor.
that seminary happened to, is no longer active, I think about several years ago, it closed down, but that's just several years ago now. Originally, the Bangor Theological Seminary was known as the main charity school. Jehudi Ashmun was there as the first principal. So now, the courses taught at the charity school were similar to those he took at Middlebury. So as the first principal, he was also the only instructor in the fall of 1816, and he took charge of 6 students. He was described by the author of the history of the seminary as a man of more than common intellectual ability. He was of a profoundly religious nature, and it was his deeply cherished purpose to become a missionary to the heathen. So that's important to know that this was in 1816. It was known that he had already wanted to do some missionary work. Yehudi's credited with getting this seminary in working order, and he brought it to public notice. He was also involved in fundraising. But what was happening there was that he was criticized for preaching too much. He was admonished by the trustees of the school, and here we see how his commitment was sometimes manifest. You have preached 25 times in 2 months. That's 15 times more than you ought. If you will persist in preaching at such a rate, your race will be short. And this is where his intensity of character, drops in here. But there was a shortage of preachers, and the research shows that he was filling in for people that weren't available. So anyway, he also helped the trustees, and it says here, to design their plan of government. So he was doing other things other than teaching here. He's credited with being the prime mover in bringing the seminary to public notice, and he worked as their financial agent. So he was doing more than teaching. But there were complications here, and what happened was he had had a girlfriend in Champlain named Catherine. She was a teacher there, named Catherine Gray. And apparently, when he moved to Maine, she didn't want to go with him, so she stayed home. Well, when he was in Maine, he met someone else. And so he started a relationship there that everybody in Maine apparently knew about. So, but Catherine must have found out and decided she wanted him back. And when the choice was to be made, he chose Catherine from Champlain. So meanwhile, the students in the town were really upset by his choice. They were married in Maine in October of 1818, so 2 years after he arrived there. So they were married, but the students were really upset because I guess there was some affiliation with the woman, they were in contact with the woman from Maine. Anyway, the school trustees investigated the whole case, and they found that the students were wrong in how they were thinking. And, but the situation became, and this is a quote out of the research, intolerable to a person of Professor Ashmun's high-strung and sensitive nature. So, in the spring of 1819, he left his position at the seminary and he moved to Boston and then to Washington, D.C., where he took a different road. And he devoted himself to writing and trying to make money for his family. Anyway. So, what happened in Washington, D.C.? He became connected to the, I told you this is a complicated story. This man was not straightforward. He did many, many things. And he became connected to the Protestant Episcopal Church. And he first edited, and then he was a publisher of the Washington Theological Repertory Monthly. So that went on from August 1819 to July 1822. And this was a 32-page religious pamphlet that he produced, 32 pages every month. And what was in it was religious directions, scholarship, history, reports on local and missionary activities. And he also, in this publication, was a lot of the activities of the American Colonization Society. And this was all, and we know way back when he was finishing school, he wanted to be a missionary. So all this information about the American Colonization Society had affected his future decisions. Oh, the other thing he did there was to publish, and it only turned out to be one edition, of a publication called the African Intelligencer. And that was, it was edited and produced by him. Again, 32 pages for this. And it talked about articles on the slave trade, African geography, the expedition of the Elizabeth, and that was a ship that carried the first group of colonists over to Liberia. And it was all about the American Colonization Society Constitution was in this first publication. Well, as it turned out, the Colonization Society was upset about this publication because it cost too much. And there wasn't a support at this point in time for this kind of journal, and they canceled it after one issue. All righty. That works. Okay, my clicker has, I'm going to need somebody to press buttons here. Is that, so Jehudi Ashmun is sitting in Washington, D.C., and every month he's publishing a bulletin with all sorts of information, 32 pages. In addition, he writes a memoir, which is the life of Samuel Bacon. And Samuel Bacon was a minister of the Episcopal Church and was one of the first to look for alternative locations for the freed black population in the States. And those that were freed from captured slave ships. Because what happened at the time was that Congress in 1819, around the time that Jehudi was writing these, writing his bulletins or his brochures, Congress had said that they will no longer accept slave ships coming into the ports. And what was happening was that if someone persisted, they would capture them, and then they would send them back to wherever they came from. So that was happening at the same time. And this was another argument to create the province of Liberia, or the Liberia on the African coast. So that was an, oops, we lost, okay.
How do I get this?
Oh. All right, so I was talking about the memoir. There was a memoir on the life of Bacon that Ashmun put together. So this is another book he wrote on top of all the other publications that he was producing at this time. And here's Bacon. So Bacon was currently the principal agent upon the coast of Africa for receiving the Negroes, mulattoes, or persons of color delivered from the boats. And on board the vessels seized in the because of the slave trade. So that's what happened. So he's getting all this information about Liberia through this, writing this memoir. So, to summarize, this is what he was doing in Washington until 1822. 36 journals, 32 pages each. I put 30 there, it's not right, it's 32 pages each. And he did a biography. So that was an extensive amount of writing, and it understands the intensity with which he lived. So let me talk about the American Colonization Society. I think maybe you have heard about it, I maybe briefly. It was not designed to abolish slavery, although at first it was supported by abolitionists, such as Gerrit Smith. Gerrit Smith's name is right here, and Gerrit Smith was very much an abolitionist, but they changed it. All 12 of the managers that ended up for the Colonization Society, all 12 were slaveholders, including Henry Clay, who was probably the best well-known name. And in fact, he said he would not be involved if it had anything to do with the abolition of slavery. So this Colonization Society was basically created to move people, to move our Black Americans out of the United States. Now we're talking about people who were third, fourth, fifth generation in the United States, and it depended, the Colonization Society felt if you were free and the color of your skin was black, then you would want to go back to Africa, which is, I mean, I don't want to go back to Germany, that's where some of mine go. I don't think we're all immigrants. It was kind of ridiculous. In hindsight, we see it as ridiculous, but it wasn't at the time. So what happened was they declared, and they would have ads that declared that they didn't want to interfere with the institution of slavery. The other thing was, in Liberia, in Africa, there was a trade. There's always an economic reason behind things, right? And so they wanted to open up a place in Africa that would would allow trade in and out of the continent. So that was another reason that they wanted to have some place in Africa and Liberia. Okay. So this was the return of the Africans that were stolen from the or sold, or however they arrived on slave boats, and they wanted those. They wanted to have a place to bring them back to because there were a variety of places they could come from. That was, and the side benefit of opening up Liberia and Africa was that they could remove, and that term was used in research, all African Americans from U.S. soil. So that was, and these are free people who are earning a living and have families. first colonization effect in Liberia did not go well. It was very difficult to acquire the land because, hey, guess what? It belongs to somebody else. You know, isn't that that's right? When you are a colonist, if you are a settler, you're probably sitting on somebody else's property, and that's what was happening. But people were still motivated by the African wealth and the potential, so they kept sending agents to negotiate with the local natives in Africa for their land. This guy's name, Robert Stockton, pops up periodically because this guy, this is an aside, this guy was a naval captain, and he was so committed, now listen to this, does this sound familiar, to stopping slave ships, that he disregarded the rule that only ships in American waters could be stopped. So he went out in international waters and stopped slave ships, which is good. But it wasn't lawful. It was illegal to do that. But he would capture these slave ships, and he needed a place to bring them. And this is where they were living. This is the coast. So, there was also a guy also set up here, who was starting the colony of Liberia right here. And his name was Eli Ayres. And Eli Ayres was also an interesting character because he met with the native, and the native man was named King Peter. It's really Zulu Duma was his recognized name, but they called him King Peter. The British and the Americans decided to call him King Peter. He was the leader of the natives that owned the property, the Liberia shoreline. And he's the one, so this Stockton, who I showed you before, I don't have a picture, Stockton and this guy Eli Ayres, they represented the Colonization Society at the time, and they met with this guy, and they threatened him basically because he would not sell his property. So the story goes that they put a gun to his head, and somehow with a gun to his head he agreed to accept their $300 for the coast, and that was about 130 miles of coast, 130 miles long and 40 miles deep. So on December of 1821, the purchase was made, and they started to bring colonists in to settle. So here we are again. This is the place we're talking about. That was what happened. All of this happened, and Jehudi Ashmun arrived in August of 1822. And he had 37 colonists with him. The guy, Eli Ayres, who had put the gun to the head of the native king, had left in April. So Jehudi was the principal agent dealing with unhappy natives and colonists who had been, a few colonists who had been on their own until August, until he arrived. Because his ship that he brought his 37 colonists had food and what people needed to survive. He brought his wife with him. Catherine came with him. But she died a month after they arrived. Malaria, they assumed, and everybody, as it turned out, of the 37 colonists and Jehudi and his wife had died, and the rest were all ill, maybe except one or two, because malaria was, what was happening? They were promoting going to Liberia, but they forgot to tell them about, about malaria and the risks. So, when Jehudi arrives, they're outnumbered, and because the natives, lived there, and there's a population there. But they had a firepower, and a cannon and rifles. Well, this is not anything that people had there. the natives had spears. So the colonists were taught then, when they came, to shoot. And apparently they had 2 battles, which are described. Yehudi wrote about this situation, and there were 2 battles. And he wrote a book, History of the American Colony in Liberia, and in that he said he arrived in time to prevent the extermination of the colony. And he was repeatedly attacked by natives. Apparently about 1,500 natives in December of 1822. Now he arrived in August of 1822. So there were about only about 30 colonists left, I guess, to defend themselves. And so he himself, Ashmun himself, was sick. And so, but they survived. They survived because of the firepower they had. He regained his health, and then in May of 1823, this guy, Eli Ayres, who had taken off, came back. And he took over, and there was, as a result of him coming back, there was further unrest in the colony. And because the people that were colonizing there did not want to obey certain rules that were set up by the colonization society. So anyway, Yehudi's dealing with all of this, and he's sitting, he's all by himself right here. And this is our guy from Champlain. So what happens? Oops. So this is where all of this is going on. So what happened was, another guy pops in, and his name is Ralph Worley. And Ralph Worley ended up actually writing the biography of Jehudi Ashmun. But in the meantime, he was called in by the Colonization Society. They moved Yehudi out of Liberia up till Cape Verde because they thought he was doing a bad job. Well, he wasn't doing a bad job, as it turned out. But while he was up here, this part of Africa, with this Ralph Worley, they put together a constitution. And they brought that constitution back to Liberia about a year later. And they started, so Yehudi went back as the agent for representing the government, the U.S. government, and the Colonization Society of Liberia. So this constitution said that all residents are free, but the society was in charge, so there wasn't a local government as such. And that's the constitution that they accepted. And that was not accepted. That's what they wanted, and the Colonization Society decided that that wasn't the constitution. And in fact, as it turned out, they persisted and lived there, but they didn't have a constitution until 1847. So they couldn't agree on how to run the government until 1847. So this is all happening in 1823. So they went over 20 years without a constitution. The final constitution, FYI, was based on the Constitution of the United States. That constitution held until 1980 when it was replaced. This was an oath that was supposed to be taken to support the Constitution. Okay. Let's see. We are at, what happened here? Okay, so we're moving on to 1825 and 1826. Yehudi's still there, he's back in charge, and he was starting to take steps to lease and annex and buy tribal lands along the coast and along the major rivers. So he describes his circumstance in this is his description, that on January 23rd of 1826, he wrote to the board, our town begins, so imagine Liberia in Africa. our town begins to assume the appearance of a beautiful little commercial West Indian seaport, and certainly has one of those most delightful situations on the face of the globe. In beauty and grandeur of prospect, no station can be taken on the Potomac half so charming or half so commanding. So he's talking to people in Washington, D.C. It would, I am confident, prove to be the members of your board as ample remuneration for much of their disinterested labors for Africa. And this is all blah, blah. But anyway, to make a single visit to their colony. I don't believe many, if any, ever went to the colony. But they would see a well-organized, improved Christian society, because Yehudi was a minister, and founded by their hands, and deservedly taking rank among the most virtuous and happy communities. This is the coast he was talking about. Well, I would say that was a cause for beauty. So this is the coast of Liberia. It's an actual picture. It must have been beautiful. When Yehudi was there, he was building a nation. And also when he was there, he was petitioning for missionaries, because that was his purpose. He was convinced that the success of that colony depended on Christian practices. So, and the conversion of natives, and that's not dissimilar to what we thought when settlers were founding our country here. He had declared early in his life, Yehudi's life, that he wanted to be a missionary, and one could say he was now able to make this happen on a large scale. Okay, then in 1827, he became involved in repatriating those captured Africans who were on the Antelope. Now, the story of the Antelope is a 7-year story. It was an illegal slave ship that had been captured off the coast of Florida in 1820. And it was a long 7 years for the people on that ship, that's for sure. But eventually it was agreed that some would be sent to Liberia. And upon their arrival in December of 1827, Yehudi wrote to the Secretary of the Navy, and he said, "These people have proved far beyond expectation, orderly, peaceable, and industrious. More than 40 of their number have brought with them that best of all personal endowments, a simple and imperfect, but serious, practical knowledge of Christianity. I trust their good conduct during their probationary year will secure them, listen, probationary year, will secure them the good wishes and patronage of all in the colony." And that's probationary year. Any colonists that went to Liberia, any colonists that came into the U.S. and got property here, had to really prove themselves for 1 year in order to receive the full benefits of owning the property. You had to sit on it for a year. I know my family in Peru had to sit on their property for a whole year before they were allowed to sign the deeds. So it wasn't unusual, I don't think. So, but there's a little side note here that anyone that was on a slave ship that was repatriated to or was sent to Liberia did not have the same rights as those of the free or the newly manumitted African Americans that came to Liberia. Isn't that interesting? Until 1980, American Liberians, people descended from Americans ruled Liberia until 1980. So that sort of descendancy, or the power of descendancy, occurred all that time, for all that time. So, in 1827, Yehudi was fully described, and he represented the Colonization Society, but he was the principal agent of the United States government in Liberia. So 1827. And he was proud of it. And he said he built it into a stable colony. The success of the colony of Liberia under the administration of Mr. Ashmun had confirmed a large body of reflecting and benevolent men in this country in the opinion that the scheme of African colonization was entirely practicable, and that in all its relations it promised vast and enduring good to mankind. So the American Colonization Society was taking full credit for the success in Liberia. But we have Jehudi Ashmun's final days, 1828. He was so ill, and maybe it was still the malaria, because, but they don't diagnose it. He had to return home to recover. And Amos Pettengill, who got him started in Champlain, met him and talked with him, and records that they had a final meeting together. And their interview was deeply affecting both of them. And Ashmun acknowledged that it was Amos Pettengill that started him on his journey, on his career. What's interesting is also he wrote to his parents. His parents were on the way, he was in Connecticut, and his parents were on their way to see him. And they arrived after he died. He died in August of 1828, and his mother arrived to see his burial at the Grove Street Cemetery. So today, if you go to Champlain, you will see that he's hailed and recognized and memorialized for his perseverance in successfully preparing the way for a new nation of being Liberia without carrying the taint of the American Colonization Society. In 1891, the Plattsburgh Sentinel published a summary of his life's work and concluded he was Champlain's first born minister, missionary, and martyr. This marker is located in the park on Main Street in Champlain, and it was dedicated in 1959 and a representative of the Liberian consulate. So this is, and I was reading this, and this is, he says, he arrived in Africa in 1822, saved Liberia from destruction in 2 battles against hostile natives, expanded its territory, codified its laws, established commerce, initiated a democratic government, and his fight for Negro freedom gave birth to a new nation. And then he's also noted here as a schoolmaster in Champlain. So this is in Champlain. Now, also, back in Liberia, there's a street named after him. Stamps were issued in his name. And this is interesting. This is the battle. Of course, we know during the battle he was very ill and everybody else was ill, but he looks very strong and brave on this stamp. And you can see see his picture? There, a picture is very common. And so back home, however, the Ashmun Institute was formed in 1854. In 1854, the Ashmun Institute was formed, and it was formed specifically for the education of Black Americans and was the first institution founded anywhere to provide a higher education in arts and sciences for the youth of African descent. So this was happening in his name back home. The Institute also hosted lectures dedicated to the abolition of slavery. So, but what happened as soon as the Civil War was over, the institute was renamed to Lincoln University to honor the late president. You can see here, there's a note here that it says it was previously Ashmun University. Or Ashmun, yeah. And his own recollections were published in a book, so that exists. This is back home. And even closer to home, this was published by the Champlain Presbytery. The high regard he was given is shown in this letter. This letter was sent to the editor from the Champlain Presbytery, to the Plattsburgh Republican in 1851. We hail with satisfaction the Republic of Liberia. We cherish with affection and admiration the memory of Ashmun, the first governor of the colony, who was born within our bounds and belonged to one of our churches, to whose piety, enterprise, and heroic courage the Republic of Liberia is largely indebted for its existence and prosperity. So this was written, though, also to counteract, people still accuse Jehudi of being in cahoots with the American Colonization Society. But the Champlain Presbytery said, no, that wasn't the case. So, there's still a book, there's a whole lot of facts about what he did and where. And it's a book that still hasn't been written, even though there have been a couple. And some of the sources of information don't exactly match. But this summary of his life was from J.W. Harkness. J.W. Harkness, I don't know if you know through history, this man was incredible. He wrote pages and pages of our local history. And here he's commenting on Jehudi Ashmun from Champlain. And he served as their minister, their lawmaker, their commanding officer, and I was talking about what happened in Liberia. He succeeded in establishing his colony, or Free State of Liberia. Jehudi Ashmun was born and brought up right here in Champlain. He gave his life to the cause, died at the early age of 34. But great poets and other authors commemorated his achievements and mourned his death. So this is what the conclusion was. His biographer was Ralph Ridge, and he said it simply, he attended his funeral, and he said, we've come to the burial of no ordinary man. Minister, teacher, principal, educator, author, publisher, lawmaker, American colonization agent, and I would conclude that he was a miracle. Nearly a century after his death, the British history of Liberia calls him one of the most remarkable men who have ever given their lives in the service of Africa and the African. So that's a pretty good comment from the country that he was from. Now, I have more to tell you, but I don't know, have you had enough? Yeah.
Keep going.
You want more?
Yes.
Okay. Yep. Okay. Sorry, guys. Sorry. Okay. All right. This is a postscript. Okay. He came from an extraordinary family. Okay, and I'll go through this quickly. I know you've been very patient. Thank you very much. But Samuel and Parthenia, it's Parthenia, as her name was, it's an ancient Greek name meaning virgin or maiden. So Samuel and Parthenia had 10 children. And Samuel was an original founder of Champlain. And he was the town clerk for 6 years. 6 years, yes. And he was a private in the American Revolution, which many of the Clinton County town founders were, and you'll hear more about that as the year goes on. And he spelled, when he came to Champlain, he spelled his name with a M-A-N, but it was changed to U, and his family all used U from then on. Okay, I'll just run through these kids because some of them are, most of them are pretty amazing. Okay, Mercy was the same name as Parthenia's mother, by the way. She was born about 8 months after they were married in the fall of 1790, and she never married, and she died relatively young. Okay, Raymond. Raymond was born a year and a half later, and he never married. His father left him 1 cow and 5 sheep, provided that he'd live with and take care of his mother. So apparently he did that. There was also an annuity for Raymond. It appears he took out a trip to rural Wisconsin. You'll hear about rural Wisconsin. It's not like rural, but it's the name of the town is rural, R-U-R-A-L, Wisconsin, to see one of his brothers. His brothers, everybody was concerned about him, so I don't know what his issue was. He's buried out there in Wisconsin. Okay. And then there was Yehudi right here, which we've already talked about. And then there's Nancy. And Nancy married the Odell into the Odell family. So I think there are a lot of Odells around here. So I think that she might be descended, or people might be descended from her. There might be a few. Anyway, she is buried in Quebec. Maybe she lived in Quebec. Odell was from Quebec, and that's where she's buried. Okay. Then there's Samuel Jr. Okay, Samuel Jr. He left Champlain in 1818. So his brother had left in 1816, so he left in 1818. He worked for the American Fur Company out of Montreal for 5 years. This is a wonderful picture that we have of him. He was then sent to Keweenaw Bay area in Minnesota, where he was put in charge of a trading post. So this guy did a trading post. There he married Nancy Kennesaw Brichette, and she was the daughter of an oops, I'm going to screw it up. Okay, anyway, and a well-known native chief in Sandy Lake, Wisconsin. I won't embarrass myself by not being able to pronounce the name. Okay, they had 7 kids, 5 boys and 2 girls. And then they moved to Sault Ste. Marie in Michigan in the early 1830s, where he was appointed justice of the peace for the county. And then he went on to hold almost every public office that they had out there. He was one of the Sioux's first judges, and he was elected 3 times as a state representative in Michigan. There. And there is the street named after Samuel Ashmun Jr. So he dominated the affairs of the Sioux in Chippewa County for many years. More often than any other citizen, he was selected as chairman of civic and public meetings. He had considerable means, a store, a dock, and a farm, traded in furs, and had commercial fishing operations and dealt in real estate. So this Ashmun family was absolutely incredible. So it wasn't just Yehudi that was out there making a difference. Okay. Oh, by the way, the Chippewa County Historical Society says that he was one of the most famous citizens of Sault Ste. Marie. So, from Champlain, born in Champlain. Okay, here's Harriet. Harriet, she married Charles Ames and had 3 sons, but she died young at age 38. And Eunice. Eunice died in Champlain at age 16. Orson Branch. Okay, Orson Branch Ashmun was another notable. He was named after his mother's brother-in-law, Cyrus Branch. And he was known as O.B. By the public and his family. And he was accredited with being highly intelligent and well-educated. So this is another Champlain boy. This is kind of his family tree. But I just put it up there because I didn't really have, I don't have a picture of him. But he married Eliza Watson from Lacole, and we all know where Lacole is. And he was, she was considered well educated too for her time. And he intended, OB wanted to be a doctor, but because of maybe financial reasons, he gave it up. And he turned he was a wagon maker, an editor of the first newspaper published in Champlain, and he was an ardent abolitionist. And his son named his son, here's a petition. OB's name is on here, OB. Henry Ashmun, which is one of the sons. And let's see, the other ones over there, let's see. There's Samuel, that's the father, and Raymond. And Noadiah Moore. That's on this petition and abolitionist petition, slavery petition. Okay, then OB had some health issues, so he moved, and I don't know what's the difference between Clinton County and rural Wisconsin, but apparently there was enough that, so he went out to Wisconsin. His brother Silas, and you'll hear about Silas because Silas is younger, was out there. And so was actually OB's son, Jehudi, was out there in rural Wisconsin. So they went out there, and he set himself up there as a wagon maker. And they set up the first Presbyterian church in rural Wisconsin. Eliza Watson Ashmun is buried here, and that is, she is Samuel's wife. And so she must have come back to live with the family. And this is OB's son, and I think it's grandson, actually. Apparently they're oil paintings that we don't, so we could get a picture of OB and Eliza, but Jehudi, this Jehudi apparently has them, but he's dead, so I don't know where they are. They're somewhere, and maybe someday we'll see. Oh, OB's granddaughter. I mean, this goes on and on. She was a noted writer of 18 novels for adults and children. I mean, these people are amazing. Okay, now we're talking about Silas. Now, his name is Silas Hubble Ashmun. Anybody from Chazy? You know the Silas Hubble name. So, and it's interesting. So obviously Samuel Ashmun thought enough of Silas Hubble in Chazy to name his child after him. And Silas Hubble had a varied degree. He attended Union College for 3 years and the Auburn Theological Seminary. So he married Mary Van Santwoord, had 5 children, and he appears as a minister. He was a busy man. He appears as a minister in Riga, New York. This is on census information. Then he was reported to be a missionary to natives in Walton, Wisconsin. And then back a minister in when he moved to rural Wisconsin in 1860. And then later on, he appears in the census as a banker in Falls City, Nebraska. So this man really moved around, but also doing different wonderful things. So the reason we know about them in rural is because there was a book written, and it talks about the early settlers, O.B. Ashmun and Silas Hubble Ashmun, that were part of their community. And then there's Henry, and Henry, he was born when Parthenia was 42 years old, and he died relatively young in 1840. Henry is buried in Champlain. Parthenia died in Champlain in 1852. So such were the Ashmuns, this is the end, such were the Ashmuns of Champlain. They became nationally, internationally known, and Jehudi was Both of these gentlemen were documented as being highly respected, as were several of their brothers. They were an extremely ordinary family. Extremely extraordinary family. So, all about the Ashmans. Any questions?